Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
In a moment, we are going to jump into an interview with Anne, who identifies as an ISFP personality type. A few things to keep in mind before we get started. First, we may use some shorthand and technical language in this interview. So if you want a handy download, a guide that can help you visually follow along, visit personalityhacker.com and find that PDF directly below this episode. Second, just want to bring attention to the fact that Anne has been through our profiler training program. She knows herself and type very well. So with this in mind, we want to encourage you to look past stereotypes you may have for the ISFP personality. We want to have a real conversation with Anne today. If you are brand new to type, I stands for introvert, S stands for sensor, F stands for feeler, P stands for perceiver. These four letters are called dichotomies. They are what most people know about personality type. But here's the thing, the true power of this system comes from understanding personality on a much deeper level. These are called the cognitive functions. So in this interview, we're going to dive into these deeper waters. To get an overview of the ISFP cognitive functions, search our podcast titled ISFP Personality Type Advice. The cognitive functions can be a bit technical at times, so we recommend downloading our handy ISFP guide directly below this episode. Just visit personalityhacker.com to download that PDF. Today, we have a special guest on the show, Anne Spurrier. Anne, welcome to Personality Hacker.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Anne, we invited you to come on today because in the Myers-Briggs system, you identify as an ISFP. You've also been part of our profiler training program, and so you've been through understanding how to sit down with somebody and have a conversation, help them arrive at their best fit type. So you are an ISFP in the Myers-Briggs system. You've been through some deep learning and understanding around the system itself. And so we thought you'd be a great person to have on the show to talk a little bit about what it's like to be an ISFP. What is it like to go through maybe the struggles, some of the growth challenges and all those things? And we could talk about that today, see where the conversation goes.
So the first question I want to ask you is, how did you even stumble upon type?
Yeah, interesting question. So I've only been in the type community probably, 2 or 3 years. I think I got into it fairly late in 2018, and I discovered you guys through your podcast shortly after that, after sort of deep diving into it, and pretty soon decided that I wanted to sign up for profiler training. So I had quite an intensive sort of getting into type and learning experience before going for that. How that all came about was I'd always been interested in kind of personality and psychology quizzes and things to maybe help decide what career are you suited to, or different personality systems. So I'd done Insights and a few others that I can't even remember. And the reason I'd done them is that I think probably since about my mid-20s, I'd started very loosely getting into personal growth content and personal growth work, because I felt like there was something very different to me compared to the other people in my life. I both felt and was called very sensitive, and being told that I was taking things very personally. I kind of felt separate and an outsider when I was in group situations. At work, I had I could always pick up the basics of the job, but I struggled to feel like I was fully integrating myself into the work community. I always felt like everybody else fit in and seemed to get it, so to speak. But there was something different about me. So I think just getting into some personal growth content, personality systems, it led to typology. I had the very typical experience, 90% of people have, which is they land on 16 personalities and test as INFJ. And and through 16 personalities, I didn't really understand what INFJ was, because that site doesn't use cognitive functions. And it just made, it focuses on, being an introvert, feeling a bit different, feeling more sensitive and thoughtful than your average person. So I didn't think I was an INFJ for very long, maybe somewhere between a few weeks and a couple of months max, but it hooked me enough to like want to like dive into it further. So that was when I found out about your podcast shortly after, actually, because I just searched INFJ everywhere I could find, and I would just basically try and find like the resources that seemed the best. Yeah, like after coming across like you guys and your content, I could tell that like you were into this stuff deep, both from like a, you know, like a quality of content level, but your message about from the start has always been about using it for personal growth and to actually improve your life and work on yourself as a person. Or that's how I've taken your message. And that's what appealed to me. Yeah, because I genuinely wanted type to help work on some parts of myself. After like sort of reviewing a lot of your INFJ content, wasn't really sure whether that was my type or not. But I also used it to try and find out my husband's type. So I was like using your content. We realized that both of us related to using introverted intuition. But like when we were like looking at my husband and his functions and what type he was, INTJ was very clear for him. And it explained a lot about his life and his way of thinking about things. And I realized at that point there was no way I could be an INFJ because I was very different from him in some ways. So from there, I set about trying to find out what my type actually was. And this was like while I was undergoing like the profiler training virtual content. So I'd already signed up for it by this point. I discovered, ISFJ. And I was like, oh, wow, that sounds a bit more like me, but still wasn't sure. And then when I heard about INFP and what it meant to be like an FI Dom, I was like, okay, that sounds more like me, but I'm still not 100%. So I would go back between INFP and ISFJ. And that was where I landed at your guys' live event. Being around people, which I guess this is kind of a clue to my type, because being there in person and experiencing people of different types, I was like, okay, I'm connecting a lot with like the FI people here. I'm pretty sure I'm not ISFJ. I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I think I'm INFP. Went about living as an INFP for a while. And then after the event, so I stayed in contact with a few people. And I was talking with Joyce Meng, and through like talking to her, reviewing her content, I was really starting to have doubts about INFP because I realized I wasn't sort of good at verbally processing and connecting ideas and hadn't sort of researched and thought about as much stuff and connected it in these weird and wonderful ways, like an NP would. And then I decided to undertake Melissa's class, the Advanced Profiling 201, and got really into like actually profiling other people at that point. And as I started going through that course content, before that, I did what was your old certification program with Melissa. And then I've done advanced profiling since that. And through doing both of those courses, I think it was during the first one that I was like, yeah, I'm probably not an INFP. Am I an ISFJ? What am I? So I booked a typing session with Melissa and I was like, yeah, I'm so confused. Please just help me find my type. And, I was quite honest about what I was experiencing and stuff. And I said, I think I could be INFP, but it doesn't seem right. I feel I could be an ISFJ, but I just don't want to have to be that like responsible and process driven. I hate the thought of being that, please help. Yeah, that was where she helped me realize that like I was an ISFP, which was, complete shock to me because I hadn't looked at SE that much and I hadn't really like patterned out what it meant to be like one of those types and hadn't looked at them in an awful lot of detail. And I'd always presumed that even with like SE as your second function, that you had to be like this super body aware, physically skilled person. And that just didn't seem to be me. So following the session with Melissa, I sort of re-examined myself for a long time through the lens of ISFP and all of those functions. Because something in the session, it felt right. It explained why none of the others would stick, but I was still having trouble really resting into it. So I took a few weeks to just really like look at myself through the lens of that type. And I realized that it explained so much about myself. And yeah, since then I've just, especially with the SE and NI functions, I've looked at those through like myself. I've looked at myself through those quite a lot. So yeah, it's that's been my journey really. And since then I've just felt way more comfortable interacting, in the type community in general. And yeah, I feel like happy to be my type, happy to be a sensor. And yeah, so that's me and I'm here. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you as an ISFP, your driver process is going to be introverted feeling authenticity.
Mhm.
And, someone might be listening right now. I'm listening right now going, and that's the process that's supposed to know who you are and how you're wired. And it sounded like I don't know how I should interpret that. Are you saying you struggled knowing who you were, or it was you knew who you were and there was a sense of like trying to hook some external system? Like how did you experience that as such a person that I would imagine is very in touch with your own identity and how you show up to the world?
Yeah, it was definitely confusing for me. And I think there's like a paradox with FI that like you know yourself so well that you feel like there's always more to know. And also you see so many parts of yourself and see yourself through the lens of so many different things. Everything that you look at, you're looking for the you reflected back in it, I think. Well, that's my experience anyway. And I think coupled with like having tertiary NI, that's it's not the strongest intuitive function when it's in that position. I wouldn't pattern things out incredibly well. So I think that's probably the reason.
I think that that's actually quite common. I think people who lead with introverted feeling or authenticity do see so many different aspects of themselves.
Identify with so much.
Right. And so when you look at all these types that you talked about, INFJ, INFP, ISFJ, like there's a little bit of all of that in there, right?
Yeah.
And so your type journey of going from, the original, and I think that is very common. I think people test out as INFJs a lot. And going from that original point of origin through all of this content and talking to people and figuring things out, do you think that there was value in going through all of that for you? Like, was it a good journey, or was it just one that you were just so ready to be done with?
Kind of both, really, because I think like every time I was looking at myself through the lens of a different type, it was exciting for a while because it was like, really cool to imagine myself through the lens of this type. Oh, does this explain that about me? And, that kind of thing. But I wasn't looking at the full picture. So I would like live in this bubble of thinking that I was this thing and identifying with the concept. And then the bubble would burst and I'd be like, what now? So after that happening quite a few times, and sometimes it went back and forth between them as well, several times. Yeah, I was just kind of ready to be done with it. So I know in the profiling world, there's a lot of people that are pretty sure of their type and they'll go and get profiled by different profilers in the type community for the experience. It's more the MPs that do that. That's not really me. So I think it's very like more SENI. I just wanted to know and kind of be done with it so I could move on. Yeah.
What's your relationship as an ISFP to imagination versus reality? Like, how do you experience, like, how ISFPs have reported to me, what I can understand is there's this very imaginative part of you. You can almost imagine what life is like. You have speculative, that intuition at the 10-year-old tertiary place, that introverted intuition perspectives process allows you that imagination, thinking about what's possible. But then there's a part of you that's grounded in reality. So like, how has that shown up for you in your life? The differences in this, and how do you experience it as an ISFP?
One of the things that like made me realize that like I probably wasn't an ISFJ on my own was that I tend to project things positively, first of all, rather than negatively and in a worrying way. And what I mean by that is like, say there's an event coming up, like a party or a wedding or something like that. If I feel like it's something I want to do and I want to go to, it's not even in my control. My brain will just start kind of like, predicting these sort of like super fun, happy scenarios that are going to happen. And I'm going to think it's going to be really good. And, all of that kind of stuff. I'll be excited about it. And then when I get there, I realize I've put too much expectation on it because I was looking at it through this sort of like romanticized FI, NI lens. And that it felt for a while that reality, was disappointing. For general things, that kind of doesn't matter. And you just kind of have to like think, is this really going to be fun when I get there? Am I really going to enjoy that? When I've done it for bigger things, it's been quite painful. So one example of a bigger thing is that when I was in my early 30s, so probably around the age of 30, I'd like sort of managed to get to a place in my career where I could like cope with the daily grind of like, normal office working life. And I had this desire to like be a manager and, wanting to be, like a sensitive and inspiring leader and stuff like that. And I was kind of like using FI and NI to envision the things I would do and how it would be. And I was kind of blinded off to like the reality of the situation and would kind of like push it aside and think that it didn't matter. So a job position came up within the team that I was actually based in. My manager left. So I went for their job, meaning, that I was going to be managing the people I'd worked with for like the last few years. And most people grounded in reality would realize that like, well, do you know what? There's actually like some social and power structures that are going on, and people don't just react okay to being managed by somebody who was one of them on the team and barely even one of them because they were kind of pretty quiet and just doing their own thing. I was just kind of like, oh, it's going to be so good. And, I'm going to overcome this, and this. And I was really like looking forward to it, sort of working up to it for a few months. And when the news was actually announced to the team that like, oh, so-and-so would be leaving and I would be managing, obviously I've got SE and I could like read people, I could read the room in that moment when they found out I was going to be managing them. And I was like, that was the first time I got a true sense of like, I've bitten off more than I can chew here. Because before that, I was kind of like a bit more careful and cautious because it was just a struggle for me to integrate myself into like normal work life and, like the social fabric of how people are in offices and stuff like that. And I was like, well, I've overcome all that, I've got good intentions for how I want to run the team. I'm going to do it the right way. It'll all be fine. And if I don't check in with reality enough, it's wonderful while I'm not checking in with reality. And then when I get like a message back and it's a negative one or it's disappointing in some way, it's horrible.
Mm-hmm. So you were talking before, thank you, by the way. That's all fantastic insight. You're talking about the fantasy that ends up in your mind is that relationship between your driver of introverted feeling and authenticity and your 10-year-old or tertiary of introverted intuition and perspectives. And they kind of go hog wild together. But when you discovered you were an ISFP, all of a sudden there's this extroverted sensing or sensation co-pilot sitting there for you, which I'm suspecting is sort of your reality check, part of you. Or at least helps with that. So can you talk about when you discovered you were an ISFP, how it's helped facilitate some of that growth? Like what is leaning into that part of who you are? What's that helped with?
Firstly, it's helped with that very thing. So I know that like, I guess because I'm somebody who, my own emotional response or internal reaction to something, that is my motivation and that is the information that I trust and rely on. That's fine. That's all well and good. But like to actually, rather than then just go into like a fantasy world of imagining, I realized like why ISFP made so much sense was because that example that I gave you, like in the office, it happened so many times. So just learning that actually, because it felt like this imaginative world was a good place and, something that was like serving me well and stuff, and in some ways maybe it was. Just learning I was an ISFP and that I'm actually supposed to take more time to check in with reality and not just go off of an initial read that's coupled with the emotion, that in itself has been groundbreaking. I'm trying to think of some general ways that's helped. I have a on and off love affair with like profiling people. And I'm very much like back on with it at the moment. I've got myself to like a more consistent, stable kind of love of that. But the reason I was so up and down before is that, I have this thing like when I'm watching like a film or a TV show, I love like reading the scene and predicting what's going to happen and stuff like that. and it's normally right, and it's fun and it's great. But when it comes to like actually doing that with like a real human being in a profiling session, the stakes feel higher. So therefore my NI feels more insecure, because it's not this little enclosed thing where it's just me in a TV show. This is like a real person that I'm profiling, and I want to show up as a good and competent profiler. So like what would happen was I would like get an initial read of their type. I mean, sometimes it would be right and that would be great. But then like a lot of the time I would attach myself to that initial read. And because I'd felt it so strongly, because all the functions I use, it's like, I don't know, they physically go through your body registers what's happening. It was really hard to like, I don't know, not attach to that initial read. And when I then found out it was wrong, it was quite painful. Like, say, for example, if I was doing one of your courses and I turned in a session to Melissa, to Mark, and it had been wrong, because I trust my read of things so much, or I did, yeah, it felt quite painful to have like profiled a person wrong. And I think that's like the insecurity in the intuition.
And you're talking, you keep mentioning Melissa. Melissa Harris is our advanced profiling coach. And so you're going through this program that was actually pretty intense, and you had lots of sessions you had to turn in, and you got a lot of feedback. So that part of you of extroverted sensing, I'm imagining the reason why it's, you said groundbreaking, but probably also grounding, is because that part of you just has to receive what's going on around you. Like it doesn't, it just goes, okay, well, let me meet reality where it's at, as opposed to requiring reality to meet me all the way where I'm at. And you mentioned that you really trust your intentions. And so you're resting into yourself and trusting yourself and that sort of thing. But reality isn't always being played on your terms. It's also being played on its terms. So you're talking about this part of you that has trained itself to meet reality where it's at. That's what I mean, that if I'm patterning what you're saying right.
Yeah. And I think it's like slowing down as well. So, people that are using NI in a healthy way, so like my husband, for example, they'll take the time for their NI to fully understand something. They'll also like ask other people for input to feed into like this perspective that they've got. They might still have that initial read, but they know that that's not the full picture, and they're just thinking about this stuff all the time much more deeply. So one of the things I've sort of, consciously tried to do, it still trips me up sometimes, is just slow down. Okay, this is the read that like I've been getting. You know what NI does to you. Give it a bit of time, get some more information, wait, look, watch. Yeah, where it still trips me up sometimes is, yeah, it's like if I'm doing a piece of work and you press like the submit button or the send button on an email or something like that. I think I've thought everything through, but maybe I should actually like wait or try and like read it in a little bit more detail. And have I actually thought of everything? Because I think with SE and NI, you like that immediacy and quickness. So you want to think, yep, that's fine, just send. Or, yeah, okay, we've thought of everything, let's go and do this thing. And then with NI just behind, what often happens is these few sort of like consequences or considerations pop into my head after, and I'm like, oh no, yeah, I should have thought of that.
So I have a question about your driver and your 10-year-old, introverted feeling authenticity, working with your introverted intuition perspectives process. So I heard an ISFP basically tell me this one time. They said, it's hard being an ISFP, and I want to know if this resonates with you, Ann. And if it doesn't, I want to hear this too. So she said that being an ISFP, you see the future. You imagine something that might happen. And let's say it's something that would go wrong, maybe something that you're anxious about or something that could go wrong or whatever. She said, I see this in the future, maybe a month out from when I am right now. And that's my perspectives, intuition, seeing that, a 10-year-old perspectives, intuition, ISFP. And then it kicks up to my driver process. Oh, here's what we're seeing. But my introverted feeling authenticity process isn't seeing in the future. It feels its emotions right now. Like it's not saying, oh, I'll feel those emotions when that thing happens. It all of a sudden starts to feel the bad feelings or the anxiety or whatever that traumatic thing that's going to be a month out that you can imagine is coming. And then she articulated, it's really hard to let those feelings go then. They feel almost like they feel so real. They then reinforce my perspective of the future, only making, like, it's a cycle now. So now I've got this perspective that I feel maybe bad about, and those feelings are immediate and visceral in the moment. And now they only support and make me think even more anxious or stressful or traumatic things in the future. So this is just one aspect of how it showed up for her. Does that resonate with you? Is that something that feels like that's what's happening for you, or is that totally a different experience on your side?
Yes and no, because generally, yeah, like my thinking, it's like my scope of thinking, and I don't know, the way I see myself, it's very like moment to moment. I don't think much beyond, yesterday, today, and tomorrow in some ways. But I know what you mean, because when something then exists in the future, that's what kind of makes it more real. So, yeah, for my NI to project something, it needs to know that something's going to happen, and that will make it do that thing that you've said. So, yeah, so for example, if I've like applied for a job, like a lot of people, got pretty nervous in job interview situations, and I don't get much comfort in preparation. My preparation is basically like going for walks and letting my NI just run wild with like scenarioing it out, or just like playing parts of the future interview out in my head. Yeah, so what will happen is, if I have a job interview and it's like 3 weeks away, every time I do something sort of low-key sensory, like go for a walk, or I'm like chopping, veggies or something like that, my mind will just like keep going there, and it'll keep playing the interview out like it's happening. I get a mixture of comfort and anxiety from that. But the anxiety comes from not so much that my brain is doing that, but it's more like I can't plan for it. To have to plan for something a few weeks away, it's kind of stressful, and I don't feel like I get comfort from it anyway. So like for this podcast, for example, I was like, oh, should I like write some notes and do some preparation and stuff like that? And I didn't, because like it just won't be of any comfort or use to me. If I wrote notes, I wouldn't pick them up in the meeting and look at them. So yeah, that's kind of my experience of what you asked me.
Yeah, because you were talking before about doing a piece of work and shooting off an email and then going, oh my gosh, did I think of everything? Right? Your introverted intuition or perspectives 10-year-old starts to get nervous about the consequences of not having thought everything through. But I've noticed that when ISFPs give themselves permission to be more in the moment, to be more improvisational, like not have to prepare everything through, and then give themselves permission to just, like if I didn't think of everything in that email, well, then I'll just send a follow-up email. That freedom to act in the moment and to not have to think everything through is actually when they show up as their best selves. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the reason I had trouble with that before was, 5-10 years ago, the workplace culture was like more strict, more, everybody was, trying to look perfect and like they didn't make mistakes and stuff like that. So there would be me, this like perceiver, struggling to do that, but feeling the stress and pressure of that at the same time. And I had a boss that like, once upon a time, very much liked things that way, to be perfect and thought through and super careful for you to follow processes step by step. Don't miss one. And now I'm not so bothered. I still kind of like wish that I could like NI it all out and just have this thing that's lovely and perfect the first time. But it's not the end of the world. And I've kind of got the energy and I'm okay with like, doing that little bit of after work. Yeah.
Yeah. But don't all of us perceivers wish that about ourselves? I don't think that's just SPs. As an MP, I'm like, yeah, that would be really awesome to be able to like, be planned out and do it in the future. I've just given up. I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to show up and see what happens.
Yeah. And I think like where that's like been heightened for me, and maybe for like other ISFPs, is you feel very like watched a lot of the time, kind of like watched and judged, like a little bit like you're this weirdo who doesn't quite get it and doesn't quite fit in anyway. You feel like the eyes are on you. So you have to kind of like get over that and be a bit more comfortable with just, doing things the way that you're meant to, that suits, your functions.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, We are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. That's interesting you said that, because I was getting ready to ask you, what is the thing you have to give up, or what's the cost? Because obviously when we have, as an ISFP, if you're consulting your perspectives process and you're looking to the future and you're kind of in your head and you're not in the real grounded part of that extroverted sensing or sensation co-pilot, it's obviously doing something for you. And to let that go and be more in the present moment and be with it and be more present to that, I would be interested to hear what did you have to give up to be in this space now? Like, what did you have to let go of in order to be here?
It's an interesting question. And yeah, part of me almost doesn't know the answer, because I guess the way that I've explained like NI, and I've just been hearing myself like say this, I'm like, it doesn't sound like great. It sounds like I'm supposed to be in SE. What I probably had to give up was like some kind of like idea of perfection that I was trying to reach, and both in terms of like being seen as somebody who was perfect in the work environment. And I think that can come from like inferior TE stress as well. But then also just, I feel like in some ways I've always been like relaxed with like, just letting life and the world happen like the way it's meant to and stuff like that. Apart from when I had those like NI idealisms. And I guess it's like when I've had those idealisms about how I thought something was going to be, it felt like something to give up, because leading up to the event, I would feel all these emotional highs and feel really good about something and live in this like fantasy world about how like great stuff is and how it's going to be. But it's worth giving up for like not having that bubble burst feeling like when you get there, I guess.
So I hear you saying there's kind of two fronts. One was an image part of it. In other words, it allowed you to control the perspectives of how people saw you, almost in a way. You had a sense of projecting an image to the world, and you were careful, and just being in the moment, being responsive. You can't manage that image as well. And then I also hear you saying that you had some disappointment feelings. Like when you build something up in your head and then it wouldn't be matching in reality, you took the emotional hit of you felt deflated or disappointed. And so the image on one side and the disappointment on the other, being more in your extroverted sensing or sensation, it kind of, you had to let go of the image, and then you also had to let go of the bad thing, which was the deflation feeling, which is a positive let go of.
Well, can I piggyback on that?
Yeah.
I think what I heard her say is there's a moment in fantasy that is a high. And the disappointment comes because the reality can't match that high of the fantasy. But I bet that's a really delicious feeling, that high. And so what you really have to give up is the high, but you also end up having the benefit of not having the deflation. So
I see. Yes.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's like the thing that really the sacrifice is the high of the fantasy. And then, as you mentioned, Joel, and what I took from that is, that perfectionism, or the way that you want to show up, there's a desire, and you even mentioned a little bit of your extroverted thinking or effectiveness 3-year-old, which I'd love to talk about next. But there's this image of being so good at all of this. And when you're more in the moment, you let go of being able to control other people's image or being able to control their judgments. You just kind of have to hand yourself over to whatever other people's judgments are. But I'm suspecting that the more you're in that place, I suspect that you're actually judged better. Like, people actually like you more and you being just sort of with yourself and trusting yourself to move through an experience, as opposed to having to plan it all and show up in exactly this way. I'm guessing it's actually working out better for you.
Yeah, definitely. And one of my last bosses was an ISTJ. And I was very much, because when I was in that kind of NI space that you were talking about, it wasn't like the FI person that I wanted to be, because, I believe people are their best selves when there's not like a pressure to like look better than what they are and stuff like that. And I think people should be resting into that kind of stuff more. But I had like this ISTJ boss, and quite soon after being a manager, so this was before finding out I was an ISFP, so this was something I kind of learned on my own, was that I was just really honest with the team about like my flaws, and I would let them see me make mistakes and things like that. I actually, because I know you guys have always said that like the world doesn't necessarily reward you for developing your second function, your co-pilot. That was my experience at work, because at first my boss actually said to me when I was very like showing up in this way, he was like, you're doing a great job and stuff, but you need to be careful, because if the team see you make all these mistakes, they won't respect you. And I was like, but like, I just need to be like I said to him something along the lines of, I just need to like be a real human though. And you know, we'd caught up a couple months down the line or whatever, and the conversation came up again. And he was like, do you know what? Like, that's actually created, you doing that thing that we spoke about, I've noticed it's created a way more positive environment in the team, because people aren't trying to cover up their mistakes. They're not trying to hide things. And it's leading to like, you know, more honest dialogue, people like judging each other a bit less and stuff like that. So it was actually a good thing for me to be doing that.
I think that is such a difficult lesson to get through, that when you initially start working on that co-pilot or auxiliary function, especially if you're trying to balance it, it's complicated, right? There's a lot to it. And the feedback from the world will not initially, I mean, like when you're doing hard work, you want to be rewarded for it as soon as humanly possible, right? Because it's tough. And you won't necessarily get that feedback, but if you hold the line and you just keep going, I found that ends up being the story. A little bit down the line, the world goes, all right, yeah, I get it. I can see this. And that sounds like that was your experience with your ISTJ boss.
Yeah, and because the way that I said about being sort of more open and naturally, you know, honest about like my flaws and stuff like that was very much how I was as a child. So this sort of NI perfection and image management, you know, it was like a learned behavior in response to things like, I don't know, perceived judgment and bullying and, you know, seemingly impossible work standards and stuff like that. So yeah, like even though I've always felt like I've known myself and it's been important to be true to myself and stuff like that, I wasn't really when I was like super in that kind of NI perfectionist kind of space.
So let's hop over to, because you kind of mentioned it a little bit, to that 3-year-old or inferior function of extroverted thinking or effectiveness.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. The 3-year-old, right? It's always such an interesting conversation. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about your relationship to that part of you?
Yeah, it took me a while to realize TE was my inferior function and settle into that. But it does make complete sense at the same time. But the reason I didn't relate to that was because, you know, the stereotypes of perceivers and TE inferior, at least used to be in the type community, is you're dropping the ball and your responsibilities and stuff all over the place. You can't show up to anything on time and stuff like that. Whereas kind of like as a stress and don't judge me response and I don't know, trying to show up to the world okay, that hadn't been my experience, you know, like even now, like I love the idea of people thinking of me as productive. That's like always been the thing. And sometimes when it's in its extreme, like I was really trying to cope in the work world, I remember thinking that like, you know, I'd rather people think I was productive than like nice and friendly to customers and stuff like that, which doesn't sound like, you know, feelery at all. Yeah, I'm trying to think of some other sort of like TE examples in my life. Whenever I've been in like really sort of like challenging jobs, like that management one I was talking about, really struggled when like my FI has been like strongly triggered. Yeah, sometimes as like a manager, I would feel very separate to and at the mercy of the team. And you know, sometimes they would like, you know, band together and say, oh yeah, we're not happy with this, or we don't like this decision that you've made and stuff like that. And, you know, there was some sort of like more, you know, extroverted and judging types in the team as well, you know, what seemed like much more outgoing and stronger characters than me, you know, so they kind of like knew how to like manipulate people and stuff like that. Whereas that wasn't really like something that like I could or wanted to do. So they would do things like if they wanted to get their way with something, you know, they would say, we don't like this decision. And, you know, we think you've made it from X position. It could be something like, we don't think you actually care about us by doing that and stuff like that. And yeah, like it would like really trigger my FI. And when that kind of thing happened, I would literally like hold it in all day at work. I'd be so quiet because it would take all my effort to not like just, Hulk rage kind of thing. And then I'd get home and I would like, I'd be like slamming things, throwing things, wanting to just scream in frustration. That's happened throughout my life, not just in that work scenario, but that happened a lot when I was managing a whole team of various characters. But yeah, that kind of things happened a lot. Also, very similar to that, the amount of like stress and frustration I would feel at having a lot on my plate, or a lot of spinning plates, a lot of responsibilities in jobs, if I'd sort of worked too hard. And it was quite hard for me to switch off as well. Like it's weird, like some things that are the essence of like a TE way of thinking, I don't like, I'm kind of actively against them, but some things I either respect or love or feel beholden to. Being at work and doing a good job is one of them, and getting all the things done on time and stuff like that. So with the amount of pressure I put myself under, to be organized and things like that, a similar thing would happen if I'd had a bad day and my to-do list was out of control and didn't want to do it and stuff like that. I would like come home and that slamming, throwing, emotional outbursts, that kind of thing would happen. Yeah, going back to like the managing people example as well, is I relate to like what Susan Storm has described as like rage-fueled fantasies, like destructive fantasies when someone triggers like your FI really badly. So say, for example, someone at work had like, what I had seen as like purposely twisted my intent and my meaning into something else to try and get what they wanted. Yeah, I would come home and I would like say the most awful things, like I would like be like shouting to my husband that like, I wish they would die and stuff like that. And in the moment, I would really mean it as well. There would be like the part of me that's like always kind and compassionate and gentle would just completely switch off. And I would just have to blurt out the most horrible things, It'd almost be like I'd want to go back into the office and, start, running the team in a way that like, if it was like a prisoner of war camp, you'd be committing war crimes against humanity or something. It was, that kind of thing. I would need to say it. I would just need to say it, blurt it out, and then I would calm down and feel terrible. So yeah, that happens quite a lot.
I think what I hear you saying then is that the way that you identify with extroverted thinking or effectiveness being your 3-year-old or inferior function isn't in this lack of productivity, flighty, can't get anything done. It's more that this position, I think for everybody, it's a place of like, well, first of all, we're almost always trying to compensate for it, particularly if the world reflects back that this is not supposed to be a weakness of ours. Like particularly extroverted thinking or effectiveness, or like even as an ENP, introverted sensing or memory, it's like these are rewarded functions. And so when you don't have this down, you go, okay, well, maybe I should. And so in some ways, we are very encouraged to stretch out of our comfort zone and not be so one-sided. But what I hear you say is that you identify with it as an inferior 3-year-old function with the indecisiveness or the lack of confidence that comes from it. Like you make a decision. I would imagine if you had extroverted thinking or effectiveness as a dominant or driver and somebody goes, well, I don't like how you made that decision. The ETJ just thinks, well, tough, right? And moves on with their day. Whereas for you, it would become something that really impacted and affected you all day. And you'd have to like let out some of this pent up emotional steam around it being reflected back that somebody didn't like it, or they thought something about your character or who you were based on this decision. Ooh, that was not okay. And so now you've got all this like, this is complicated now, right? You don't just mentally go, well, tough, or maybe I'll take your feedback into account later or whatever. Now it's really impacting you. Now it's like a thing, and where it sends you into like a highly emotionally intense space. That's more of what you're identifying as your 3-year-old or inferior function of how it shows up for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it was because whilst there's many ways, obviously, that I'm very secure in my FI, yeah, it is obviously an insecurity there. And because, like, on some level, I don't want to tell people what to do. Like, it took a long time for me to be comfortable with that. But part of me kind of like got, how people perceived TE management hierarchy structures and that. So there'd be a combination of what you've said combined with like their disrespect to me as an individual kind of thing. Part of me would think, well, I'm the boss, so just put up and do what I want, but only in those sort of like real black and white extreme TE moments. But there was like many times when I used it for good at work as well. So there wasn't really many TE users in the team. So in some ways, I was better at time management, prioritization and organization than them. There was a lot of FJs in the team. And, I would teach them concepts like there's a book out there called like Eat That Frog. And like the idea is that like if you had to eat like this horrible squirmy frog every morning, you'd get it done straight away. And it's a metaphor for tackling the worst things on your to-do list first. And because we dealt with some difficult customers and things like that, it very much resonated with them. And I would give them a lot of support with like prioritization, structuring their workload and stuff like that. I've always been good at like keeping a diary so I don't forget meetings and responsibilities and stuff. Another way that it comes up is that I rely too much on like last moment stress sometimes to get things done. I don't realize how much time they'll need. And the thing will pop into my head like, oh yeah, you should do that. And then I'll kind of push it away and think, no, that can wait. That doesn't need doing now. It's not urgent. And then it'll all kind of stack at once and overwhelm me. And I'll rely on that last minute stress to like get something done in time. Those are the other things coming to mind.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is that a lot of times maybe some descriptions of being an ISFP don't resonate with you, potentially, because you have a more complicated relationship with all of these functions than I think is sometimes communicated. And I think that that's important. As you were talking about your type journey and figuring out your best fit type, there are these things that we identify with, but these other parts of descriptions that we don't. And sometimes it's just a matter of really looking at the functions in and of themselves, not looking at some sort of holistic type description necessarily, but start to sort of track your personal relationship with these functions. When you find your best fit type, it starts to really make sense. And you're giving all these great examples of like, well, I do have this complicated relationship with extroverted thinking effectiveness. When I'm working with people that don't use this, in their first four functions, I kind of feel like I have an edge over them. But then at the same time, I also recognize, well, yeah, I do tend to procrastinate. Even though my time management conceptually is a little better, in practice, I'll kick the can a little bit and then all of a sudden find myself in a stressful situation and having to scramble at the last minute. And that's a pretty classic extroverted thinking effectiveness 3-year-old thing to do. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that there's not this sort of really dry black and white relationship we have with all of these things. Like sometimes it's a little more complex and you have to dig into it. But once you find your best fit type, oh man, now it really is making sense.
Yeah.
Let me ask you what you love about being an ISFP. What are all the really great things that come along with being of this type?
I think I would have gone this way anyway, possibly, but with some of those work examples that I was giving you, it was very much when I was in like a period of, I want to be a manager, I want to progress, career success is really important to me. And I think I was being driven quite a bit by those backseat functions at the time, because it happened around turning 30. So that's kind of like when they have like a bit of a louder voice as well. Mm-hmm. What's happened sort of since then is that through like some company restructures and stuff at work, I had the opportunity to take redundancy or go for a job that would be quite sort of like SITE heavy. There was going to be like a third good option that I really wanted to happen, and it didn't work out that way. So it was sort of take redundancy, figure out a new career path, get a different job, or take that sort of very SITE job. And I chose the redundancy option. And yeah, it's been good for me since then, because my previous jobs, always required me to like, show up in an office, be part of a team, have things very planned out and organized, think about like the whole month ahead and stuff like that. And just the stage I'm at in life and being an ISFP has given me permission to like say it's okay if I want to say no to those things. Once upon a time, I very much wanted them So then that was okay as well. But now that like I've lived through them, yeah, they gave me some stress, but growth as well. But I've decided I don't want to continue on that path. It very much makes sense for me with my type and my functions to be in a situation where I'm living a bit more like day by day. So right now, obviously I'm doing like some admin and customer service work for you guys. I'm also, so I love clothes, like expressing myself through clothing is like one of my passions. And I also care a lot about sort of like sustainability and environmental issues. So whilst I'm doing it very much as a business to make money for myself, I'm selling like vintage and secondhand clothing on a platform as well. And all of these are things, that like I want to do. It's not so rigid and structured and stuff as the very sort of like judger world I was in before. So being an ISFP has given me extra permission to like do that. Yeah, I mean, knowing that there's like two types that lead with FI and what they mean, even though like I never fully feel part of like, I don't know, communities and organizations and stuff like that, it makes me understand sort of why, and that there are people that are driven so much by their feelings and have these kind of experiences, like I'm not the only one. Using SE and I as well. So I used to like wonder why a lot of people seem to like be so driven by process and precedent and stuff like that, why they used to feel connected to the past and memories and things. And I realized I don't have that same tether as some people. Like again, knowing my type, I guess it all helps explain why. And so even if I don't quite feel like I have the same place and ease and comfort in the world as like some of the other types do, I know why, and that I'm not alone in that.
What are some of the advantages to being an ISFP?
One advantage is like you don't realize like how much other people see it as a gift when you're just like, you're not judging others so much and you're just living the way you want to live and giving other people that kind of like freedom and stuff. It is a gift to like the people in your life. Yeah, it's very easy for me personally. So I'm not sure if this would be the case for other ISFPs, but I have like strong boundaries and like healthy strong boundaries and a sense of who I am. And when I hear about some people struggling with that stuff more, it makes me sad because I get a lot of, I don't know, like reward and comfort from that and stuff. And I give myself a lot of permission for self-care and to do the things that like I want to do in life. Yeah, I try and like help other people in my life give themselves that permission as well, because it makes me really sad to think, if I couldn't give that to myself, it'd be horrible. When I hear other people sort of like, obviously I've told you about some of my NI anxieties that I've had, but it's like nothing compared to how much other people feel compelled to worry about and plan for things sometimes. I realize that I'm lucky to not have to worry that much. For example, with my husband being an INTJ, he just can't switch it off. He's simulating and scenarioing and problem solving everything every minute of the day. And it's very rare that his brain actually switches off, whereas it's nowhere near that intense for me. So those are the main things that are coming up for me.
When you mentioned the boundary thing, I have to tell you that we were actually talking about you yesterday about that very thing. I was telling, Ines, who's on our team, and me and Antonia were having a conversation, and somehow you came up because you do some work with us. And I said, one thing I love about Anne, because I also have introverted feeling authenticity, but you have it as a driver. It's my co-pilot. So I learn from people that have it as a strength. And I said, one thing I love about Anne is she really has a strong sense of herself where she ends and other people begin. And I love that she can be empathetic and be with somebody in an emotional experience from my observation, but not own it and not like take the burden of it for herself. She can then be in the experience, and then when the experience is over, let the person have that back, and you don't like bring it into yourself. You've got a really good sense of self around that. And I've actually observed you just casually in working with you, and I've hooked to myself, said, I want more of that, what she's got, that less owning of something. I think it's a superpower you bring, specifically you. But I bet a lot of ISFPs might be able to tap into this. And I think it's fantastic because it really illustrates to me how I can be empathetic without owning everybody's stuff, because that can get overwhelming and you can burn out very easily if you don't have that kind of sense of self, I guess.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, like sometimes I do find that like, the people in my life, it's more like when I've had like friends that have been like FJ types, they want that more from me. And I think like a point of like contention or like, I don't know, unease between us has been when I haven't like picked up on that from them. But other than that, yeah, I would say it like mostly serves me well. Because all it takes is for someone that I care about to like, just tell me you need me to like up it and be there a bit more, and I probably will. Yeah.
That's interesting. So I bet people, like you said, there's maybe feeler judgers. So using harmony, extroverted feeling, they might see somebody like you that has that strong sense of self as cold or distant or not emotionally connected or not involved or invested in something, when that's not necessarily what's going on. It's just that you have a sense that you can hand it back to the person after the encounter.
I think it is that. It's like I very much care, and with the people in my life especially, I very much care and like and want to help. It's just, I guess I feel like I know what's mine, so I presume that like they know what's theirs, kind of thing. And yeah, I think there's that thing, isn't there, that like you presume everybody is like seeing things through like your worldview. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anne, for being on today and having this conversation with us. I think you brought some personal experience, reference experience through your personality type, ISFP, that I think someone listening can gain a lot of value from, whether they're an ISFP themselves or they have someone in their life that's this type. I think you brought a lot of good things to the table. So thank you so much for being on the show this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
What is your story? Are you an ISFP? Do you resonate with what Anna's talking about? Or do you have your own personal take? As Joel says every week, and apparently I jumped in and decided to do it this week.
Which is cool.
Yeah. Come over to personalityhacker.com and leave your story. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to iTunes or various Android platforms. And if you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. If you were a little confused about what Anne was talking about when we were talking about different cognitive functions, right? We talked about her driver, or co-pilot, or 10-year-old, or a 3-year-old, and all these different, possibly confusing terms like extroverted thinking or introverted intuition. Check out our book. It helps break down the system, teaches you the cognitive functions, and breaks down each of the type's functions and how they relate to that type. So if you are new and want to go deeper and really understand how the system helps you for growth, check out our book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers, or you can order it through a local bookstore. But either way, check out that book. And if you like it, you can leave us a rating review on Amazon or on Goodreads. That also helps us out a lot. And of course, we have a suite of personal growth programs through the lens of personality type. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to invest in yourself and into understanding your type more and how you can leverage it to improve your life and relationship and business, head over to personalityhacker.com and under our suite of programs, see if there's one that's right for you.
My name is Joel Markowitz.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we're going to talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.